Picture a marketplace in Athens 24 centuries ago. There's an old man working the crowd, barefoot, snub-nosed, badly dressed, stopping people to ask them questions. The city called him a gadfly, after the fly that bites a horse and won't be swatted away, and a great many Athenians found him insufferable. Watch him corner some confident young man who is absolutely certain he knows what courage is. Socrates doesn't argue with him. He never once tells him he's wrong. He just asks a small question, and it's so reasonable the young man says yes. He asks another and gets another yes. A third question, a third yes. Every step is tiny, every answer is obvious, and the young man keeps nodding along, until somewhere near the bottom of the staircase, he looks up and finds he has agreed his way into the exact opposite of what he believed when he walked in. And he can't locate the step where it happened. That was the method that still carries Socrates' name. The Athenians eventually found it so maddening they put him on trial and sentenced him to death for it. But strip the philosophy away, and what's left is a tool so simple a truck salesman could use it. And one did, 24 centuries later, to sell electric motors. The whole thing runs on a single word. Yes. We're still inside the hard half of the book, how to move someone to your way of thinking, and the 4 moves in this stretch all run on the same engine. Stop shoving people toward your conclusion. Build them a path and let them walk down it themselves. The first move is the one you just watched Socrates pull. Never hand them the chance to say no. Joseph Allison sold electric motors for Westinghouse, and it had taken him 13 years to crack one stubborn account. 13 years. His predecessor spent 10 on the man. Allison spent 3 more, before the company finally bought a handful of motors as a test. Get those right, and a huge follow-up order would come. So 3 weeks later he walked back in glowing, and the chief engineer met him with a sentence that stopped him cold. I can't buy the rest of those motors. They run too hot. I can't keep my hand on them. The old Allison would have argued the specifications. This time he asked a question instead. You'd agree a motor shouldn't run hotter than the industry standard, right? Of course. And the standard allows a motor to run up to about 72 degrees above room temperature, correct? Correct. And how warm is your mill room? Oh, about 75. So if we add 72 to 75, we land near 147, and you'd scold your hand on anything that hot, wouldn't you? Well, yes. So perhaps the trouble isn't the motor at all. Perhaps it's the hand on the motor. Every answer was yes, because every question was fair, and the engineer reasoned his way out of his own objection without once being contradicted. He picked up the phone and booked about $35,000 of business. Allison's verdict, after years of doing it the other way, arguing had cost him a fortune, and asking had made him one. There's a reason this works, and a psychologist named Harry Overstreet had pinned it down a decade earlier. When a person says no and means it, the whole body braces. The nerves and muscles set themselves against you. The drawbridge goes up. A yes does the opposite. It leaves the system open and leaning forward. String together a few small yeses, and a person is already moving your way before you make the real ask. The second move is quieter still. Once you've got them agreeing, get out of the way. One of the biggest car makers in America was about to hand out a year's contract for upholstery fabric, more than $1.5 million of it, and 3 suppliers were called in to make their final pitch. One of the salesmen showed up that morning having completely lost his voice. Laryngitis. He could manage a whisper and not much of one. He was shown into a room with the company's engineer, its purchasing agent, its sales director, and its president. He stood, strained to speak, and squeaked. So he gave up and wrote on a notepad, "Gentlemen, I have lost my voice. I'm speechless." "I'll do the talking for you," the president said, and he did. He put up the salesman's samples and praised them. He laid out their strengths and answered the objections in the room. taking the whole time the exact side the salesman had come there to argue. The salesman's entire contribution was to nod and smile. He left with the contract, over 500,000 yards of fabric, the largest order of his career. And he knew, he said, that he'd have lost it if his voice had worked, because he'd have argued, and the president would have pushed back. With the salesman silent, the most powerful man in the room talked himself all the way onto his side. People are rarely argued into a decision. They mostly talk themselves into it if you can just bear the silence and let them. The third move is the most self-effacing of the four. Hand someone your idea, and let them believe they thought of it. The quiet master of this didn't live in the White House. He lived beside it. Woodrow Wilson's closest advisor was a soft-spoken Texan named Edward House, who held no office at all and whom everyone called, for no military reason whatsoever, the Colonel. Wilson leaned on him more than on his own cabinet. And House later admitted exactly how he steered a president. The way to move Wilson, he said, was to drop an idea into his mind in passing, casually, just enough to get him interested, and then say nothing more. The first time it worked, House recalled, it was an accident. He'd urged a policy on Wilson and been brushed off, and then a few days later at a dinner he heard the president serve up that very idea as his own. House didn't correct him. He didn't want the credit. He wanted the result. A struggling salesman named Eugene Wesson found his way to the same truth, the slow way. He sold design sketches to a New York stylist, and over 3 years the man had turned him down something like 150 times. Then Wesson changed exactly one thing. He walked in with a stack of unfinished sketches and said, "I've got these half done. Would you tell me how you'd finish them so they'd actually be useful to you?" The buyer kept them a few days, told him what to change, and Wesson drew them up precisely to those notes. The buyer took everyone, because by then they weren't Wesson's sketches, they were his. Wesson had stopped selling, and the man had started buying. Emerson named the feeling a century before either of them. In The Work of Genius he wrote, "We recognize our own rejected thoughts coming back to us, and we never love an idea more than when it arrives wearing our face." The last move asks the most of you. You have to actually see the thing from where the other person is standing. There was a park near Carnegie's house that he loved, and every summer he watched boys build little cooking fires under the trees. Fires that got away from them, sometimes badly enough that the fire department had to come. At first he handled it the obvious way. He'd ride up on the boys, order them to put the fire out, and threaten them with arrest if they didn't. It worked, in a fashion. They'd stamp it out, sullen and stung, and the moment he was over the hill, they'd build it right back up, probably half hoping the whole park would burn. So he tried beginning from their side instead. He'd ride up and say something like, "Having a good time, boys? What's cooking? I loved building fires when I was your age, still do, to tell the truth. But you know how fast these can get away from us out here. The dry leaves catch, and then there are no trees left for anybody. I'm not going to play the policeman, I just hate to see the place ruined. Would you do me a favor and rake the leaves back from it and bury it in dirt before you head home? And next time maybe build your fire over in the sandpit where it can't hurt a thing." The same park, the same boys, the same fire, and a completely different ending. No sullenness, no rebuilt blaze because they hadn't been ordered, they'd been understood. They got to keep their dignity and the trees got to keep standing. 4 moves. The yes, the silence, the borrowed credit, the other person's point of view. Set them side by side and they look like 4 separate tricks. They aren't. Every one of them does the same single thing. It goes around the ego instead of charging straight into it. That's the real secret under the Socratic method, and it's almost a letdown how plain it is. Persuasion was never about the force of your argument. It's about lowering the other person's guard far enough that your idea can walk in the door looking like theirs. The most persuasive people you'll ever meet barely seem to be doing anything at all. A question here. a held tongue there. And somehow you come away agreeing, certain you got there on your own. But every move so far has quietly assumed the other person is reasonable, that a gentle question, or a little room, is all it takes. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the person across from you is furious, or dug in, or sure that you're the enemy. What do you do then? That's where the book reaches for stronger medicine. The one sentence that can take the fight out of an angry man. The motive that flatters someone into doing the right thing. And a trick the steel baron Charles Schwab pulled on a lazy night shift, with nothing but a piece of chalk and a single number scratched on the floor. Next time, let it be their idea.